Brazil, the mythical island. Brazil, or High Brazil, not to be confused with Brazil, is thought to come from the Irish, meaning descendants or clan, one of the ancient clans of northeastern Ireland. Old Irish island, beauty, worth, great, or mighty. Despite the similarity, the name of the country Brazil has no connection to the mythical island, although J.R.R. Tolkien's essay on fairy stories linked them. The South American country was at first named Isla de Vera Cruz, Island of the True Cross, and later Terra de Saint Cruz, Land of the Holy Cross, by the Portuguese navigators who arrived there. After some decades, it started to be called Brazil due to the exploitation of native Brazil wood. At that time, the only export of the land in Portuguese, Brazil wood, is called pau-brasil, with the word Brazil commonly given the etymology red like an ember, formed from Latin brasa, ember, and the suffix "il" from the iculum or ilium. Its appearance on maps, nautical charts identified an island called Brasil, west of Ireland in the Atlantic Ocean, as far back as 1325. It also appeared on the Catalan Atlas in 1375. Later it appeared as Insula de Brasil in the Venetian map of Andrea Bianco, attached to one of the larger islands of a group of islands in the Atlantic. Searches for the island. Expeditions left Bristol in 1480 and 1481 to search for the island, and a letter written by Pedro de Ayala shortly after the return of John Cabot from his expedition in 1497 reports that land found by Cabot had been discovered in the past by the men from Bristol who found Brazil. 1674, Captain John Nesbitt claimed to have seen the island when on a journey from France to Ireland, stating that the island was inhabited by large black rabbits and a magician who lived alone in a stone castle. Yet the character in the story were a literary invention by Irish author Richard Head. Roderick O'Flaherty, a chorographical description of West or Halar Connaught, 1684, tells us there is now living Morogale, who imagines he was personally on Brazil for 2 days and saw it out of the Isles of Iran, Golem Head, and other places of the West Continent he was acquainted with. High Brazil has also been identified with Porcupine Bank, a shoal in the Atlantic Ocean, about 200 kilometers west of Ireland, and discovered in 1862. As early as 1870, a paper was read at the Geological Society of Ireland suggesting this identification. The suggestion has appeared more than once in 1883 of Notes and Queries. Fairy Stories. On Fairy Stories, an essay by J.R.R. Tolkien, which discusses the fairy story as a literary form. It was written as a lecture entitled Fairy Stories for the Andrew Lang Lecture. The essay is significant because it contains Tolkien's explanation of his philosophy on fantasy and thoughts on mythopia. Moreover, the essay, in an early analysis of speculative fiction by one of the most important authors in the genre, alongside his 1936 essay Beowulf, The Monsters and the Critics, it is his most influential scholarly work. In the lecture, Tolkien chose to focus on Andrew Lang's work as a folklorist and collector of fairy tales. He disagreed with Lang's broad inclusion in his fairy books collection of travelers' tales, beast fables, and other types of stories. Tolkien had a narrow perspective, viewing fairy stories as those that took place in fairy, an enchanted realm, or without fairies as characters. He disagreed with both Lang and Max Mueller in their respective theories of the development of fairy stories, which he viewed as the natural development of the interaction of human imagination and human language. The essay on fairy stories is an attempt to explain and defend the genre of fairy tales, or Marken. It distinguishes Marken from the traveler's tales, such as Gulliver's Travels, science fiction, such as H.G. Wells' The Time Machine, beast tales, such as Aesop's Fables and Peter Rabbit, dream stories, such as Alice in Wonderland, In the essay, Tolkien claims that one touchstone of authentic fairy tale is that it is presented as wholly credible. It is, at any rate, essential to a genuine fairy story, as distinct from the employment of this form for lesser or debased purposes, that it should be presented as true. But since the fairy story deals with marvels, it cannot tolerate any frame or machinery suggesting that the whole framework in which they occur is a figment or illusion. Tolkien emphasizes that throughout the use of fantasy, which he equates with imagination, the author can bring the reader to experience a world that is consistent and rational under rules other than those of the normal world. He calls this a rare achievement of art and notes that it was important to him as a reader. It was in fairy stories that I first divined the potency of the words and the wonder of things, such as stone and wood and iron, tree and grass, house and fire, bread and wine. Tolkien suggests that fairy stories allow the reader to review his own world from the perspective of a different world. Tolkien calls this recovery in the sense that one's unquestioned assumptions might be recovered and changed by an outside perspective. Second, he defends the fairy stories as offering escapist pleasure to the reader. Justifying this analogy, a prisoner is not obliged to think of nothing but cells and wardens. And third, Tolkien suggests that fairy stories can provide moral or emotional consolation through their happy ending, which he terms a eucatastrophe. In conclusion, and as expanded upon in an epilogue, Tolkien asserts that a truly good and representative fairy story is marked by joy, far more powerful and poignant as the effect of joy in a serious tale of fairy. In such stories, when the sudden turn comes, we get a piercing glimpse of joy and heart's desire that for a moment passes outside the frame, rends indeed the very web of story, and lets a gleam come through. Tolkien sees Christianity as partaking in and fulfilling the overarching mythological nature of the cosmos. I would venture to say that approaching the Christian story from this direction, it has long been my feeling, a joyous feeling, that God redeemed the corrupt making creatures, men, in a way fitting to this aspect as to others of their strong nature. The Gospels contain a fairy story, or a story of a larger kind, which embraces all the essence of fairy stories. They contain many of their strange nature. The Gospels contain a fairy story. They contain many marvels, and among the marvels is the greatest and most complete conceivable eucatastrophe. The birth of Christ is the eucatastrophe of man's history. The resurrection is the eucatastrophe of the story of the incarnation. So that is the explanation of the connection between fairy stories and Brazil. You could go read that later. The reason I brought up High Brazil is its connection with the mythical island or the mythical mountain, the northern mountain Meru. We also have the 5 legendary islands from folklore: High Brazil, Boyan, St. Brendan's Isle, the island of Antigua, and the isle of Avalon. These 5 fabled islands were once believed to have existed by many people through the ages. All had their own magical qualities and characteristics that were given to them by the human culture they appeared in. Presented here is a brief introduction to these 5 fabled islands before concluding with a few ideas on their possible significance for the reader to think about. So, are these 5 mythical islands speaking about one specific island? And are they referencing the northern central Mount Meru? 1595 map showing High Brazil and St. Brendan's Isle. Very interesting that they have a full map. On the left here is some kind of dragon creature playing what looks like a guitar or a lyre. I'm not sure what kind of instrument that would be. Got boats sailing around these islands. The bottom right, another dragon creature with an animal head. A monkey over here. Septentrionia livum On the top is a griffin. High Brazil in the court of King Brazil. In Irish mythology and folklore, High Brazil was the island where the legendary Brazil, the High King of the world, held his court. It was said to be situated in the North Atlantic Ocean west of Ireland and was a kind of island paradise where all good things were bountiful and people lived in peace and happiness. All who dwelt there were bestowed with the gift of immortality. High Brazil was a difficult place to find because the island was said to be shrouded in mist. It could only be seen once every 7 years when the mist lifted, which was the time when Brazil held his court on the island. It was during these brief times when the island was visible that the court was believed to be in session. Although the island could be seen at such times, it could not be reached, and King Brazil was said to have the power to make the island sink below the waves, or rise above them at his command. High Brazil was a phantom island and actually appeared on nautical maps as far back as 1325 when it was shown on the Dell'Orto chart, created by an Italian Majorcan cartographer Angelino Dulciert. There are many other examples of phantom islands that appear on the ancient maps but cannot be found and are later removed from new versions. Some are mythical, such as Antillia and St. Brendan's Isle, while others may once have existed but disappeared beneath the waves in volcanic or geological action, or perhaps covered by rising sea levels. Some, such as Crockerland, were hoaxes or based on a kind of mirage known as Fata Morgana, while others were navigational errors. I wonder if that's where the saying, that's a big Crockerland. Many explorers sought for High Brazil, and while a few claimed to have found it, no evidence was ever brought back confirming the existence of King Brazil and his island, and it was eventually removed from maps. This looks like an old painting of High Brazil, which looks Tartarian off the front of it. It's a village surrounded with the towers and a wall and two people looking from a distance in some pretty incredible clothing. It almost looks like a tarot card. The hidden island of Buyan. Slavic mythology tells of the island of Buyan, which in some traditions is invisible, while others say that it can disappear or appear when approached. Either way, it is a hidden island, and for good reason. It is the place where many things on earth have their origins, or are placed for safekeeping. The sun and the three brothers, the north wind, the east wind, and the west wind, who are his servants, live on Buyan, and it is believed to be the place where all of weather in the world originates, created by the god Perun. Buyan is the place where Koshchei, the Deathless, was said to keep his soul separate from his body so that he could not die or be killed. The only way to kill him was to kill his soul. For safekeeping, he placed his soul inside a needle, which is placed inside an egg, which is placed inside a duck. The duck is placed inside a hare, which is kept in a strong chest, which has been buried under the sacred oak tree, which is a similar concept to the world or cosmic tree in other cultures. Through its roots, it connects the underworld to the outer world, and its trunk and branches connect the outer world to the heavens. In some legends, Buyan is also the place where a pure white stone, known as the Alatir, is found. Alatir is said to be the center of the universe and has magical properties, and considered by some to be the father of all stones. Healing rivers flow from underneath it, and it is said to have the power to grant eternal happiness. It's guarded by Gagana, which is a fabulous bird with a beak of iron and claws of copper, and Garafenia, a magical snake. Buyan is also the home of the Zorya, who are two goddesses who serve Dazbog, the sun god. Their names are Zorya Utrinyaya and Zorya Vekernya. Zorya Utrinyaya is the morning star, whose task is to open the palace gates every morning to allow the sun chariot to leave on its journey. Zorya Vechernaya is the evening star, and her task is to close the gate on its return. In some myths, Dazbog is their father. The location of Boyan is open to debate, but many think it is in the Baltic Sea region, and one of the favorite candidates is the island of Ruzhin. However, many scholars regard Boyan as a kind of other world or concept without a physical location on Earth. St. Brendan's Island, the land of promise. St. Brendan's Isle is a mythical island that appeared on many medieval maps which showed it situated in the North Atlantic Ocean. It was named after an Irish abbot named Brendan, who is said to have visited on an epic sea voyage. He also came across several other islands on his voyage and mistakenly thought the back of a sea monster to be an island. The story of St. Brendan's voyage was told in a Latin text called Navigatio Sancti Brendani Abbatis, or the Voyage of St. Brendan the Abbot, that was published in the 9th century. This gave the first account of the voyage and discovery of a fabulous island paradise described as a land of promise. This was said to be a green and fertile place where many flowers and fruits grew in abundance and where there were rivers of pure water. The existence of the island was taken seriously and was depicted on many maps of the time. The most notable was Erdapfel by Martin Beheims in 1492. But despite this, it was not a place that could easily be visited, as it supposedly disappeared when approached by ships. Many sightings were reported right up to the 18th century, but it was eventually taken off maps as the Atlantic Ocean became better explored and mapped. The Voyage of St. Brendan is seen as an imram, which is a type of Irish adventure tale where a hero undertakes a journey either to fulfill his destiny or for adventure. It has much in common with the story of the Voyage of Bran, which was influenced by Irish mythology. These were written in the Christian era but contained pagan elements that challenged the hero's faith. Although the existence of the island was taken seriously at the time, it may be that the Voyage of St. Brendan the Abbot was an allegory for a desired religious, spiritual state of being. This was to be achieved through a journey of faith and obedience to the Christian way, rather than a place on the earthly plane. This is something I've seen in a lot of these legends where they say this northern island or this mythical island is not an actual location, but actually an allegory for looking within. I go back and forth, but I feel like it may be both. I think there may be truth to looking within and finding a spiritual northern world tree, northern mountain, in a center connection to the spiritual realm and God. But there's way too much evidence and things surrounding the fact that there is most likely a northernmost mountain, the least of all being the actual maps where they charted it out in great detail. The Isle of the Seven Cities of Antillia. The fabled island of the Seven Cities of Antillia is a phantom island which was said to lay westward of Portugal and Spain, somewhere in the Atlantic Ocean. Its existence was once taken seriously and was shown on maps up until about the 15th century. Both Spain and Portugal laid claim to it, even though it could not be found. Some maps depicted Antillia to have a smaller companion island called Roilla or Roila. According to older legends, during the Umayyad conquest of Hispania in the 8th century, 7 Visigothic bishops along with their followers took ships to escape their enemies. Sailing westwards, they discovered an unknown island which they settled on. They burnt their ships so that they could never return and set about making the island their new home. They built 7 cities on the island, each ruled over by a bishop, and lived there in peace, practicing their religion. The sand on its beaches was believed to contain a high density of gold dust. This may have been one of the reasons it remained on many European maps for so long, and would have been a huge incentive for any adventuring mariner to find. Some say that although some intrepid sailors visited the island, few ever left it. It may be that those who did manage to land were not allowed to leave for fear that they would divulge their sea location to their enemies, who would then look for them and destroy them. Another legend tells how passing ships have seen the island, but when it is approached, it vanishes. As the Atlantic Ocean became more frequently explored and traveled, by the 15th century, neither Antigua or Arroyo was shown on newer maps, though the Spanish Antilles are said to be named after it. Eventually, both islands were left off maps as the Atlantic became better explored. The death of King Arthur. Avalon, the Isle of Apples. The Isle of Avalon, sometimes called the Isle of Apples, has a special place in the mythology, folklore, and legend of the British Isles. It is also featured in the traditions of Brittany and associated with the Arthurian legend and romance. Most scholars agree it had its origins in Celtic mythology, though different writers have produced differing descriptions and accounts of the island and its inhabitants, which have added to its mystique. In some accounts, it is not described as an island, though it depends on how the term island is defined. Rather than being surrounded by water, it could be another world, surrounded by the known world, make it an island in the human world of perception and experience. Geoffrey of Monmouth appeared to regard it as an island in the waters, and in Historia Regum Britanniae says King Arthur's famous sword Excalibur came from the Insula Avallonis, and was the place King Arthur was taken for healing after he was mortally wounded. In his work Vita Merlini, or The Life of Merlin, Geoffrey refers to it as Insula Pomorum, or Isle of Apples. Take a moment to compare the wizard Merlin with the Mt Meru, possibly a connection. He describes it as a place of great fertility where plants grow without the need for cultivation, growing spontaneously without human aid. As such, crops and fruit, and especially apple trees in particular, grew in abundance and could be harvested any time. People lived to over the age of 100 years and often more in peace and happiness. It also came to have association with the Holy Grail. Another text by authors and titular head of Avalon is the Lady of the Lake, sometimes called Nimue, Helene or Vivienne. In various versions of these names, according to Geoffrey, there were 9 sisters who lived on the Isle of Avalon who were skilled in the arts of magic and healing, and they exercised a kindly rule over those who came to them from our land. The chief among them was Morgan Le Fay. The names of her sisters were Glitan, Glitonia, Glitan, Morono, Matzo, Tyrono, and Thyton, who was renowned for her skill playing the lyre. Morgan was the wisest and the most skilled in healing, knowing how to use plants to cure sickness and wounds to the human body. She was skilled in the art of astrology and had taught it to her sisters. Morgan was also a shapeshifter who could change from her human form to that of animals or birds and could fly in the sky. Avalon was the place of King Arthur, taken by his surviving companions after the Battle of Camelon when he was mortally wounded by Mordred. The hope was Morgan would be able to heal him. On examining Arthur, she informed his companions that he could be cured, but that he would have to stay a long time with her in Avalon and would have to accept the treatment she offered. A thought just came to mind that they were looking for someone named Morgan to heal him of a life-ending wound. I wonder if there is a representation of organ in the name Morgan, being symbolic for the healing organs that are inside of churches and chapels all over the world. This being his only hope, his companions agreed to leave the stricken king in her care and returned back across the sea to Britain. Arthur remained on the enchanted island healing his wounds, but it was prophesied he would return again to save Britain in a time of need. The location of Avalon is unknown, though several places around Britain claim the title. The most famous claim comes from Glastonbury Tor, which was once an island. Another idea is that Avalon was not so much an earthly connection, but a place that exists between the earthly realm and the other world, separate to both, connecting to both a place of crossover, but connecting to both a place of crossover or step over from one to the other. From the elusive island of High Brazil, King Brazil had a safe place to rule the world, ensuring the natural order was kept. The Slavic people gave beyond magical qualities to keep safe important concepts such as the alitar and the sacred oak tree, and it was safe enough for Koshchei, the Deathless, to keep his soul there. For St. Brendan, although he had found many islands, the land of promise which he really sought may have been more of a goal of spiritual attainment. The 7 Visigoth bishops found a distant island where a way of life they believed in and cherished could continue untroubled and in safety out of reach of their enemy. The Isle of Avalon holds a special place in the mythology of the British Isles as the place where the king awaits the call to return and save his people. Of course, there are many other ideas concerning these mythical places, but what really matters is what each person makes or is made from these 5 islands of fable. That is interesting. It says that the king is still waiting there to return and save his people, which would be all of us, the whole world, I would assume. And they're waiting for either the physical or spiritual call for the king of the legendary island, potentially the northern Mount Meru, the Tree of Life, to return and save us, which sounds also like the return of Christ and many other Messiah figures returning when man calls for them to come back and save us. All right, let's read up on Mount Meru. Mount Meru. From the Indian Peak, see Meru Peak. For the Tanzanian mountain, see Mount Meru. Okay, so there's actually a peak in Tanzania. I always want to say Tanzania. Mount Meru, also known as Sumeru, Sinaru, or Mahameru, is the sacred 5-peaked mountain of Hindu, Jain, and Buddhist cosmology, and is considered to be the center of all the physical, metaphysical, and spiritual universes. There is no clear identification of Mount Meru with a particular geophysical location. Many famous Buddhist, Jain, and Hindu temples have been built as a symbolic representation of this mountain. The Sumeru throne style base is a common feature of Chinese pagodas. The highest point, the fenial bud, or the piathit, a Burmese-style multi-tiered roof, represents Mount Meru. Etymologically, the proper name of the mountain is Meru, to which is added the approbatory prefix su, resulting in the meaning excellent Meru or wonderful Meru. Meru is also the name of the central bead in a mala. Very interesting. In a mala, I believe, yeah, it is. It's kind of like a rosary for chanting or reciting different things. So the central northernmost bead, once you make the circle around, you come back to the start at the center, which is the Meru bead. That's great. Geography. The dimensions attributed to Mount Meru, which all refer to it as a part of the cosmic ocean, along with the several other statements that describe it in geographically vague terms. The sun, along with all the planets, circle the mountain. That denotes a specific cosmology, doesn't it? The sun and all planets circle the mountain. They make the determination of its location most difficult, according to most scholars. Several researchers identify Mount Meru or Sumeru with Pamirs, northwest of Kashmir. The Surya Siddhanta mentions that Mount Meru lies at the center of the earth, Bhuva Madhya, and the land of Jambunad, Jambudvipa. Can't pronounce that one. A 9th century text based on mostly unpublished text of Yamil Tentier mentions Sumeru is heard to be at the center of the earth, but is not seen there. Several versions of cosmology can be found in existing Hindu texts. In one of them, cosmologically, the Meru mountain was also described as being surrounded by the Mandrakala mountain to the east. Suparshva mountain to the west, Kumudya mountain to the north, and Kailasa to the south. In Buddhism, according to Buddhist cosmology, Mount Meru, or Sumeru, is at the center of the world, and Jambuddvip is south of it. It is 80,000 yojanas wide and 80,000 yojanas high. Let's see what a yojana is. A yojana is a measure of distance that was used in ancient India, Thailand, Myanmar. It is about 12 to 15 kilometers. Trayastrimsya is on its peak. Trayastrimsya, heaven, is an important world of the Devas in the Buddhist cosmology. The word is an adjective form from the numeral 33 and can be translated in English as belonging to the 33 Devas. There's another explanation of the 33. That is great. You could dig into this entire article. So the 33 Devas, the Trayastrimsa is on its peak where Sakra resides. Sakra is the ruler of the 33 Devas, heaven. According to Buddhist cosmology, he is referred to by the title Sakra, Lord of the Devas. The name Sakra, powerful, is an epithet of Indra, found in several versions of the Rig Veda. So Sakra, or sacred, potentially, sacred, Sakra, is the ruler of the 33. Sounds like what we were reading about King Brizal. He is the king of the mythical Central Island, right? Okay, the sun and the moon revolve around Mount Meru, and as the sun passes behind it, it becomes nighttime. The mountain has 4 faces, each one made of a different material. The northern face is gold. The eastern is made of crystal. The southern, lapis lazuli, and the western is made of ruby. And Vajrayana mandala offerings often include Mount Meru, as they in part represent the entire universe. Also believed that Mount Meru is the home of the Buddha Kakrasamvara. Kakrasamvara Tantra is an influential Buddhist Tantra. It is roughly dated to the 8th and 9th century. The full title in Sanskrit is the Great King of Yogini Tantras. The Great King. In Hinduism, the cosmic tortoise. Look at that. Absolutely incredible. So we have the coiled serpent with the turtle, which is representative of the moon phases sometimes, or a domed world, has the shell in the interior. On his back, 4 turtles or 4 elephants or columns holding up the domed world, with the southernmost ice wall surrounding another domed world here, the firmament. And on that is the, it looks like clouds, but they usually tell us the north has the throne of God at it, and the aurora borealis surrounding it. And the legend we just read talked about the 33 devas that sit at the northernmost mountain. And this says that there are 7 planes, counting up what looks like a pyramid here to the capstone. Beautiful. And the snake eating its own tail, representative of toroidal energy, energy that goes around and round forever. So are we seeing the underworld as the turtle, which is the earth domed world with the reptile creatures living in the underworld? And upon this reptilian underworld back is the Middle Earth, which is the firmament world standing on the columns of the elephants. And on the top of that, the ascended world of the Devas. And the true firmament around that is the toroidal energy represented by the Kundalini snake here. And this looks like a better view of Mt Meru, the central world mountain here. The clouds surrounding it moves upwards into these plains. And then you have a triangular capstone, sun, third eye, illumination at the center with all of these creatures moving towards it, moving into it. Incredible. Mount Meru of Hindu traditions is described as 84,000. Oh, we just read this. Jainism. According to Jain cosmology, Mount Meru, or Sumeru, is at the center of the world surrounded by Jambudvip. In form of a circle forming a diameter of 100,000 yojanas, there are two sets of sun, moon, and stars revolving around Mount Meru. Two sets of sun, moon, and stars revolving around. While one set works, the other set rests behind the mountain. Every Tirthankara, let's see what a Tirthankara is. In Jainism, a Tirthankara is a savior and a spiritual teacher of the Dharma. The word Tirthankara signifies the founder of a Tirtha, which is a fordable passage across the sea of interminable births and deaths. Every Tirthankara is taken to the summit of Mount Meru by Indra. Indra is the king of the Devas in Svarga heaven in Hindu mythology. He's associated with sky, lightning, weather, thunderstorms, rains, river flows, and war. Indra's myths and powers are similar to other Indo-European deities such as Jupiter, Perun, Percunas, Salamoxis. Shortly after his birth, after putting the Tirthankara child's mother into deep slumber, there he is bathed and anointed with precious unctions. Indra and other devas celebrate his birth. Javanese legends. This mythical mountain of gods was mentioned in the Tantu Pagalaran, an old Javanese manuscript written in the 15th century Majapahit period. The manuscript describes the mythical origin of the island of Java, as well as the legendary movement of portions of Mount Meru to Java. The manuscript explains that Bhattara Guru ordered the gods Brahma and Vishnu to fill Java with human beings. However, at the time, Java Island was floating freely on the ocean, always tumbling and shaking. To stop the island's movement, the gods decided to nail it to the earth by moving the part of Maha Meru in Jambudvipa and attaching it to Java. The resulting mountain is Mount Semeru, the tallest mountain on Java. Sounds like they're describing the entire earth, and again, Mount Semeru being the central mountain. The concept of a holy mountain surrounded by various cities was incorporated into ancient Hindu temple architecture with the Shikara. What is a Shikara? Shikara is a Sanskrit word translating literally to mountain peak, refers to the rising tower in the Hindu temple. Shikara over the chamber where the presiding deity is enshrined is most prominent and visible. Looks like a big tower, a big ornate tower, meaning mountain peak. Early examples of this style can be found at the Harshad Mata Temple and Harshad Temple from the 8th century. This concept also continued outside India, such as in Bali, where temples featuring Meru towers. All right, let's take a look at some of the images of these mythical mountains. So here, after hearing these different stories, you can see the southernmost mountain, the ice ring surrounding the world, the central northern mountain with the four faces that was described as gold, diamond, lapis lazuli, and ruby, which is facing away from us, we can see is represented in ruby on the ground. The ground here is also matching the colors on the wall, which could have to do with the different skin color of people on the earth, the different animal types. And this is most likely where we live, in the outer realms in between. And here you have vapor with spirits rising up out of the ground, moving into the northern mountain, which is most likely the passed away, the dead people, moving into the northern mountain to be reincarnated. On top of the mountain, represented in green, which is the Aurora Borealis representation, the land of green, surround about the throne of God. The 33 Devas, the center, we have the king of the north, the sleeping king, the king of High Brazil, waiting for us to call him to save him. And these people are immortal. Most likely they do not have bodies, which is why we can't see them. They're probably in the third form of water, which is gas, I believe. So we are in a liquid state. Our bodies, our water is in a liquid state. They are most likely in a gas state, which is why we cannot see them. And above them are the ascended masters. And this is represented again and again throughout culture. This is a rug with, again, those four colors: lapis lazuli, ruby, gold, and diamond. And they have three lands, three mountains on each one of these colors, which is 12. Probably representative of the zodiac. And you have the sun and the moon revolving around the upside down triangle, Mount Meru, with the flower at the center, green on the top. And on the outside is flowers and energy representation, which is most likely depiction of the toroidal energy field surrounding around the world. And if you saw my video talking about the Sri Yantra, it's a depiction of the northernmost mountain, which is a two-dimensional drawing represented in 3D, like this right here. So Mahameru Sri Yantra, this is two-dimensional raised into 3D. We then get the world we're looking at right now. Here it is, Mount Meru. This is a three-dimensional representation of that two-dimensional mantra. No, what's it called? Mandala. The mandala. So here's the northernmost mountain, and there's lands on this mountain descending, getting wider and wider in fractal nature, lower and lower down this, and then descending into the four worlds outside, which is where we are. Fascinating stuff. So the churning of the ocean of milk. Mata in Hinduism, any monastic establishment of world renouncers or sannyasis. The first matas were founded by the great teacher Shankar in the 8th century CE. Shankar was said to have established 4 matas at strategic points in India as bulwarks for Hindu missionary activity and as centers for the 10 religious orders of this group. The Govardhana Mata and Puri on the east coast for the Aranya and Vanya orders. Each of the matas founded by Shankara is ruled by a spiritual leader or a teacher called a Shankara Karya. A philosopher who stressed the essential difference between God and individual souls. In the 20th century, Ramakrishna Mission, a religious inclusive reform group originally organized under the leadership of its founder, Ramakrishna and Vivekananda, who established matas to house its monks and to act as centers for learning and the propagation of its teachings. The Society of Brahma. Theistic movement with Hinduism founded in Calcutta, now Calcutta, in 1828 by Rama Roy. The Brahmo Samaj does not accept the authority of the Vedas, has no faith in avatars, incarnations, and does not insist on belief in karma or samsara. It discards Hindu rituals and adopts some Christian practices in its worships influenced by Islamic Christianity. So these are different sects of belief which lend themselves to a central world mountain. Mythical mountains and beings that live there. Tales of gods, magical creatures, heroes are still popular today, with books, films, games, and legends still inspired by them. In many cases, these mythical lands are islands where kings go after being gravely injured in battle. Mount Olympus is one of several locations that is both real and mythicized. Found in Greece on the outskirts of Athens, Mount Olympus was said to be home to the gods, particularly the 12 primary gods and goddesses. The actual list of these 12 varied by region and period, but generally included Zeus, Hera, Athena, Apollo, Poseidon, Ares, Artemis, Demeter, Aphrodite, Dionysus, Hermes, Hephaestus. Interestingly, although Hades is an important Greek god, he is not one of this number, as he does not live on Mount Olympus, instead presiding over the underworld. Mount Olympus is said to be the seat of Zeus's throne. It is the highest mountain in Greece, and while the mountain is often covered in clouds, perhaps contributing to beliefs that the gods lived above them. According to legend, it never rains or storms there. While it is the Athenian mountain that we know today as Mount Olympus, in truth the Greeks used the name liberally, and there were many settlements that named the highest peak relative to their own location after the mythical mountaintop. It's most likely that they were naming it after the central mountain in respect and in honor and in a way to remember it. That's my side note. The 8 pillars, also known as the 8 pillars of the sky. The 8 pillars are not one mountain, but instead, as the name suggests, 8, each said to be located along one of the main compass points. According to Chinese mythology, the mountains were thought to hold up the sky, although only 7 still maintain this purpose. The 8th Butzo of the northwestern point was damaged by the water god Gong in a fit of pique after he lost a battle to claim the throne of heaven. One of the mountains, Kunlun, was home to the Yellow Emperor, or Huangdi, as he was originally called, a semi-historic mythical figure credited with the introduction and creation of wooden houses, boats, bows and arrows, and even writing. His wife is said to have first created the process of silk production. Another Chinese deity to call one of the 8 pillars their home was the Queen Mother of the West. Every 3,000 years, the peach trees would bear fruit, and all the immortals would be invited to dine on them. Due to her role tended these peaches, Huangmu was considered a goddess of life fertility. Penglei. Another mountain in Chinese myth is Penglei. The mountain is said to be found on a remote island on the Bohai Sea, one of 5 islands which house the immortals. Its counterparts were called Fangzhang, Yingzhou, Daiyu, and Yunxia. The mountain is thought to be the home of the 8 immortals. The 8 immortals are not exactly gods, but are instead 8 humans who ascended to immortality through some great deed, skill, or dedication, assisted by Taoist magic. The mountain is an idyllic paradise, inaccessible to normal humans and covered in trees which bear jewels and fruit which can cure illness and grant immortality. The palaces of the 8 immortals were made of platinum and gold, and their cups and bowls never ran empty. Qin Shi Huang, the founder of the Qin dynasty, is said to have searched unsuccessfully for the island as part of his efforts to locate or create an elixir of life. He sent Taoist Shufu on a journey across the eastern sea to find the mountain. However, Shufu never returned. I wonder if he found the mountain and never went back. Teidi. Like Mount Olympus, Teidi is another mountain that is both real and exists in mythology. The actual Teidi is a volcano on the island of Tenerife, Spain. the mountain was considered sacred to the Guanches, the native residents of the island. The malicious god Guyoto is said to have kidnapped the sun deity and kept them hidden within the heart of the volcano, which served as one of the entrances to the underworld. Trapped in darkness, the Guanches implored Akaman, their father deity and king of the skies, to save them. Akman fought Guyoda and won. He trapped Guyoda in the volcano, sealing the exits and released the sun back into the sky. The eruptions from Teti was thought to be Guayota struggling to escape, and the native Guanches would light fires to scare Guayota back into the mountain. As you can see, there are a ridiculous amount of mountains that match this legend of immortality. The Hnityorg mythological mountain said to be home to the Jotun Suntengur, a giant from Norse mythology. He possessed the mead of poetry, a magical beverage made of honey and blood that can turn everyone who drinks it into a poet and a scholar. Those who drink were able to answer any question, and it was also a source of artistic inspiration. Satungyar kept the mead hidden deep inside Nittenbjorg, where it was guarded by his daughter Gunlod. The god Odin, Allfather, managed to sneak inside in the form of a snake. He seduced Gunlod and persuaded her to allow him 3 sips of her mead. He managed to down all 3 containers and fled the mountain. Now the only one to contain the mead of poetry and the knowledge that it promised. Mount Quof. According to Arab and Persian myth, Mount Quof is a mountain located on the furthest point of the earth beyond the ocean that circles the world. In some accounts, it is made of emerald. In others, the mountain is such a deep shade of blue that is the mountain itself that gives the sky its color. Its slope reflecting against the sky, the mountain is home to many mythological and religious figures, including angels, jinn, dragons, and phoenixes. A moment to reflect on the different sides of this mountain. Some saw it as emerald green, some saw it as blue. Again, that previous description said there was 4 sides to the mountain, so if you were traveling and you were on the eastern or western side of the mountain, you would see emerald, blue, ruby, or white diamond. So each of these individuals could be true in their depiction. Mount Quof is also said to be one of the only places that the mighty rock will land. The rock is a legendary bird, gigantic in size and capable of lifting fully grown elephants off the ground, killing and devouring them. The rock is said to be very similar to an eagle in appearance and would have been indistinguishable if not for its giant size and forked snake-like tongue. So there's another collection of mountains. We have the Kunlun. The Kunlun, or the Kunlun Shan, is a mountain or mountain range in Chinese mythology, an important symbol representing the axis mundi and divinity. Let's look at that. So here, similar to a totem pole again, it's a tower moving upwards, and looks like to me a mushroom on the top here. And animals climbing up. Again, the lowest world on here is the the turtle, which is a domed world with a potential reptiles inside, because this represent the lizard races that you hear about. The reptilian on its back, some kind of monkey or something. I'm not sure what animal it is, and it's holding up the next world. And going off its side are different creatures. It looks like monkey-like creatures, these baboons, and they are holding bowls. On the back there, here's 2 people holding some kind of axe of some sort, and on their back is a man sitting in a meditation posture with snakes coming out of either side of him, and these look like dragon creatures with men standing on their backs holding bowls. Climbing up above his head is some other creature. It's hard to see what these are. And men sitting on the backs of horses. And going up over that is a mushroom. So this is most likely the central world mountain. This is the Kunlun. The mythological Kunlun is based on various sources. Kunlun Mountains of the Tibetan Plateau, Mount Kailash. The term Kunlun has been applied to Southeastern Asian islands and seemingly even Africa, although the relationship to the mountains is not clear beyond the nomenclature. Kunlun refers to distant, exotic, and mysterious places. Different locations of Kunlun have been ascribed in the various legends, myths, and semi-historical accounts in which it appears. These accounts typically describe Kunlun as the dwelling place of various gods. As the mythology related to the Kunlun developed, it became influenced by the later introduction of ideas about an axis mundi, or a world axis. In astronomy, axis mundi is the Latin term for the axis of Earth between the celestial poles. And look at that image there. You know, the world surrounding a central mountain again, and a couple characters in the center, some kind of symbology. You have the fig leaf above them. Kunlun became identified with Mt Meru. Another historical development in the mythology of Kunlun, again with Indian influence, was that rather than just being the source of the Yellow River, Kunlun began to be considered the source of four major rivers flowing to the four quarters of the compass. We've heard that before too. Four rivers coming out that you can see on the on many different maps around the world. The Kunlun mythos was influenced by developments within the Taoist tradition, and Kunlun came to be perceived as more of a paradise than a dangerous wilderness. Some recent research proposed that over time, the merging of various traditions has resulted in a duality of paradises. Mount Pinglai, Western, Eastern paradises, the Kunlun Mountains. A pole replaced a former mythic system that opposed Pinglai with Yikshu, the returning mountain. In Yikshu, mythological materials was transferred to the Kunlun mythos. Chinese name Kunlun is written with characters combining the mountain radical with phonetics of Kun and Lun. Alternate names for Kunlun Shan, including Kunling with hill and Kunkui with mound. The term Kunlun may be semantically related to two other terms: primal chaos or muddled confusion. The term Kunlun, however, had also been used in old texts to refer to a people and places unrelated to the mythical mountain. For example, used in reference to the southern people who were slaves in China. So this is just another one of the many mountains. You know, I mean, come in, comment, tell me what you think of these mountains. Kings of the mountains, the holy cosmic mountains. And what do these things mean? Is there a connection between these different places all over the world? It certainly seems like they have a lot of things in common. This one is called the Jade Mountain, neighboring to the north and the west of the moving sands. So are all these mountains the same, or are there multiple mythical mountains? You know, there could be the central northern mountain, and there could be other mythical mountains surrounding them all around the world. But I think that there's a connection with these. So let me know what you think.